Welcome to Networking RX, a podcast devoted to helping business professionals like you enhance your networking skills in order to become more proficient giving and receiving quality business referrals and improving the overall quality of your life and the lives of those around you. The Networking RX podcast is a production of AmSpirit Business Connections, an organization whose mission is to empower business success through networking.
Welcome back. I'm Frank Agin. You're listening to the Networking RX podcast. I appreciate you tuning in. I appreciate you subscribing. I appreciate you sharing this with others. I want to relate to you a story, something that happened to me right around the holidays. Let me just preface this all by saying COVID's been tough on all of us for lots of reasons, some more so than others. I certainly feel blessed. I haven't lost anybody per se through the COVID. Certainly friends, people I know of, but close family members, we've done okay. But it's been challenging on lots of people's businesses, people's lives, their mental health, so on and so forth. But one of the great things that's come from COVID is just our willingness to embrace Zoom. I have a list of about 40 people that don't live in the Western Hemisphere. I always thought it was neat having a conversation with somebody in Canada, but 40 people that I have had the opportunity to meet literally all around the world, people who I can reach out to and say, hey, want to catch up with, or whatever it might be, and we have great conversations, and there's just a lot that's come from that. One person in particular, Andrew Stotts. Andrew lives in Thailand. If you're so inclined, he was episode 297, which was released on January 28th, 2021. And just you'll be able to get the full story for Andrew, but he's from the Cleveland, Ohio area. He's lived in Thailand for 30 years, and there's a whole backstory on it. And he has a podcast over there, very popular podcast called Worst Investment Ever, and he refers to himself as the worst podcast ever. He said it's something that nobody else would ever want to aspire to, which I think is kind of very interesting and kind of gets your attention. So anyhow, leading up to the holidays, Andrew reached out to me. He said, I just would like to catch up with you. Let's plan a call. And to be honest, I need to reach back out to him and return that favor every 6 months or so, just kind of touch base and see what's going on. And so we had a call. I want to say it was December 28th. It was somewhere between Christmas and New Year. Things are kind of quiet. And being in Thailand, they're 12 hours ahead of us. So, we need to be very careful as to what the time is. Or I shouldn't say careful, but there are only certain times that work. 3 o'clock doesn't work for one of us. If it's 3 p.m. here, it's likely 3 a.m. there, or vice versa. And so, there are certain times that work. I think we selected like 9 o'clock, or excuse me, we selected 7 o'clock. It was 7 o'clock p.m. for me, which isn't horrible. I'm not totally burnt out. And it's, not so early for him. I think he had been up, he'd gone for a walk. Thailand in December is, the weather's nice. Anyhow, we had a great conversation, just kind of catching up with things that we're working on, things, what was the big win for the year? I think was one of the questions. What are you really trying to get done in the coming year? And we kind of went back and forth with respect to that. And at one point he said, I like to go walking. Okay, nice to know. I like to go walking too. And he said that's just part of his, his daily ritual of going for a walk, getting exercise. And he says, and I like to listen to podcasts. Okay, that's great. And he says, I have your podcast. He was telling me I have your podcast, Networking RX, on my phone. Wow, thank you. That's, I appreciate that. And then he proceeded to say, but I don't listen to it. Oh, well, why not? I was kind of taken back by that. Everything's kind of, your podcast's on my phone. That sounds so positive. You think you would follow up with something more positive. At least that's what I was expecting or hoping for. Those are the types of things he wanted to hear. or I wanted to hear, I should say. And he said, well, the reason, I said, well, why not? And he said, the reason I don't listen to your podcast is that I find that the titles aren't compelling. He said, essentially what he was saying, we talked about it for a while. He just said, you go to the grocery store checkout aisle. I don't know what it's like in Thailand, but I can tell you what it's like here. And the magazines beckon to you. 40 ways to lose 10 pounds today or this week, it's all I need to see this. And it might be totally a whole bunch of nothing, but you're kind of pulling for it. And he said there's nothing compelling about your titles. And I interview a lot of people, and he says, I don't know who, he threw out a name, Kristen Stover is. I'm not compelled to listen. If you had a conversation with Anthony Robbins, okay, I might want to listen to that. But just, Mark Hirschberg, I have no interest. I have no idea. Why would I devote 25 minutes on my walk to listening to that, other than I really like you, Frank, and I appreciate you. And he said, what you need to do is you need to title these things and give them something that kind of, it's more of a tease, something that's going to kind of draw people in. And it was, I went quiet, to be perfectly honest. I went totally quiet. And he says, he's still there. Of course I'm here. We're on Zoom. You can see me. And I'm like, oh my gosh, that makes so much sense. That makes so much sense. Why didn't I think of that? Why didn't I think of that? How could I have been so wrong for so long? Here I am podcasting, and I have some great guests, and they seem to be getting better and better. There was a time where I was really struggling to get good guests, and you kind of get panicked, and you kind of, to a degree, settle. But I've had some great guests, and I've really done them a disservice. I mean, the interview and everything, they seem to go well, and great insights come from it, but I've done them a disservice by titling it something that is just not compelling. Episode 256 is not compelling. Interview with Bob Smith is not compelling. But something that's like science the crap out of your networking, okay, that's a little more compelling. And people might say, well, it's still not compelling to me. It's a whole lot more compelling than episode 473. And the reason I share this is for so long I have been operating with respect to this podcast thinking, okay, I've got it. I've got it down. I've got the scheduling down. I've got the editing down. I've got all sorts of stuff down. I've arrived. And to know where I started, I've really come a long way. I've arrived. But I guess I haven't totally arrived. And I think that's the lesson in here for everybody, is that one thing our network can help us do is to constantly improve. Because when I heard what Andrew had to say, I got off the phone and I started looking at my podcast titles. Not all of them, but a lot of the interviews. Sally Smith with ABC Company. Who wants to listen to that? It's a great story, but there's no tease there. There's nothing beckoning somebody to hit play. And so I started to retitle things. And I think I know what I need to do is not be so cavalier with respect to where I am with my existence, with where I am with life, where I am with business. And there's always something else that our networks can teach us. Always. Even people who feel as if, I don't want to say we're better than, but more accomplished than. And I think case in point is just, even talking with my kids, you know, um, I learn things just listening to what they have to say. Things that they're doing. My daughter's in social media, and she'll say things. She'll teach me things, and my kids are involved with technology and finance and things like that. And there's something there, and I think we can always glean something from our networks if we're willing to be open-minded enough to do so. And sometimes, I'll speak for myself. I find that I'm not open-minded, that I'm not willing to learn. And I can think of several instances in the last week where it's like, yeah, I should have just listened. I should have just listened. And I don't have to, I don't have to take, I don't have to, I don't have to accept everything. I don't have to say, okay, yeah, I'm wrong with every time I hear something. But what I can say is I can stop and listen and say, okay, what's right with respect to what somebody has to say? I mean, with respect to Andrew, I don't have to take at face value what it is that he's saying. I don't need to come up with titles that are misleading. Um, the networking way to lose 40 pounds. If it's not related to the podcast, I'm not going to title it that way. And he's not suggesting that necessarily either. Um, but I have to listen. I need to listen, and I need to, because I think that's one of the biggest things that our networks can provide for us is the ability to learn, the ability to stop and say, okay, yeah, I've, I'm a little off on this, and this little bit of information, this hack or whatever, is a way of me course correcting. And really what came from that conversation with Andrew was, okay, going forward, I need to do a better job. I need to go do a better job of titling my podcast, interviews and programs, to make them more compelling. I just need to do a better job. And I have, and you know what? It's showing in the numbers, in the number of listens, the number of downloads. So kudos. Thank you, Andrew. So, that's, certainly the other thing, that one thing that came from this. But the other thing that I noticed, I'm looking at all, and he was episode 297, and there was probably another 100 episodes or so after that. I'm looking at all those episodes. It's like, oh my gosh, I really screwed up. But what I've started to do is not only going back and retitling some of these things, because you can, when you retitle them in the system, you have to understand how podcasting works, but you go into the software and you retitle it, and it just kind of spews it out there to the world. It updates it every so often on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. It updates the title, so you can fix those sorts of things. But the other thing it's kind of opened my eyes to is I could start to recycle some of these things. Andrew's podcast was released again on January 28th of 2021, episode 297. I can work that back in because the messages he gave, the interview he gave with me, was really timeless. He wasn't giving me stock tips for 2021. He was sharing his story, and his story is timeless. His story will always be his story. Now, certainly there'll be updates to it, but how he ended up in Thailand and the journey he was on, he was a part of one of our Expedition Networking episodes, is really timeless, and there are lessons in there. So the lesson to this particular podcast, episode 472, entitled "How Could I've Been So Wrong for So Long," is just that: is stop and don't think that you've got it all right. Don't think that you've got it all right, and that your network has the ability to help you become a little bit smarter, a little bit better. Everybody does within your network. And you need to be open-minded enough to take those lessons and apply those lessons where you think they make sense. But it all starts with being open-minded to what your network has to say. You don't have to accept everything. Not everything makes sense. But enough of it makes sense to make a difference in what you do and the results you get.
Thanks for joining us on the Networking RX podcast. Please put what you've learned into action today and let us know if you have questions, comments, or ideas for future topics. You can email them to us at podcast@amspirit.com. That's AmSpirit.com. Finally, so you never miss an episode, be sure to subscribe to the Networking RX podcast through iTunes, Overcast, or however you receive your podcasts. Now get out and network with someone.
The Networking RX podcast is the copyright production of AmSpirit Business Connection. All rights reserved.